In a world where the justice system is often criticized for its flaws, there exists a prison that has gained international notoriety for its brutal treatment of inmates. This prison, located in the United States, has become infamous for its use of inhumane conditions and tactics that have been likened to the treatment of animals rather than human beings. Its name strikes fear into the hearts of anyone who has been unfortunate enough to end up there. Welcome to the prison where inmates are treated like animals, a place where human dignity is stripped away and replaced with violence, isolation, and cruelty. The prison in question is known as the Supermax facility, a term used to describe high-security prisons designed to house the most dangerous and violent offenders. Supermax prisons were intended to be the solution to housing individuals who pose a severe threat to society or those inside the system. However, what was meant to be a solution has instead become a breeding ground for abuse, neglect, and systemic dehumanization. Inmates in Supermax prisons are subjected to solitary confinement for the majority of their sentences, sometimes for years or even decades, with little to no human interaction. Life inside a Supermax facility is far from anything that resembles rehabilitation or reform. Inmates are often confined to small, windowless cells for 23 hours a day, with only 1 hour of recreation time, typically spent in an enclosed cage. These cells are stark with only the bare necessities: a metal bed, a toilet, and a small sink. There is no room for interaction with other prisoners, and the lack of any meaningful activity leads to severe psychological and emotional distress. The solitary confinement that is a hallmark of Supermax prisons has been widely criticized by human rights organizations and experts in psychology. Studies have shown that prolonged isolation can lead to severe mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, paranoia, and even hallucinations. Inmates in these conditions often experience a complete breakdown of their mental and emotional well-being. However, despite the overwhelming evidence of the harm caused by solitary confinement, it remains a common practice in many of these facilities. The treatment of inmates in Supermax prisons has been compared to the way animals are confined in zoos or research labs. The term cage is often used to describe the small, isolated enclosures where inmates spend most of their time. These cages are devoid of any comfort or privacy and are designed to keep the inmates isolated from the outside world. In many cases, the only time prisoners leave their cells is when they are escorted by guards to face further humiliation or punishment. In addition to the lack of social interaction, inmates in these facilities are often denied access to educational or vocational programs, further limiting their chances of rehabilitation. This lack of opportunity for self-improvement creates an environment where inmates are not given the tools to reintegrate into society upon their release. Instead, they are subjected to a cycle of punishment and despair that has long-lasting effects on their mental and emotional health. The guards who work in these facilities often adopt a brutal and authoritarian mindset, viewing themselves as enforcers of punishment rather than individuals tasked with ensuring the safety and well-being of inmates. Many have reported incidents of excessive force, including physical beatings and verbal abuse, as a regular part of daily life in the prison. The culture of brutality that exists within Supermax prisons has led to a sense of dehumanization not only of the inmates but also of the staff, who often view themselves as being in constant conflict with the prisoners. Despite the widespread criticism of Supermax prisons, they continue to operate in various forms across the United States. The argument for their existence often centers around the need to contain the most dangerous criminals and prevent them from harming others. However, the question remains, at what cost? Is it worth subjecting human beings to such extreme conditions, knowing the long-term psychological damage that can result? And more importantly, does this approach to punishment actually make society any safer? While some argue that these facilities serve a necessary purpose in protecting the public, there is growing concern over the ethical implications of treating inmates in such a dehumanizing manner. The United Nations and various human rights organizations have called for the end of solitary confinement, citing its cruel and inhumane nature. However, the United States continues to use solitary confinement as a standard practice in many of its high-security prisons. The issue of prison reform is a complex one, with many different perspectives on how best to address the needs of both inmates and society at large. However, one thing is clear: the treatment of inmates in Supermax prisons is a violation of basic human rights. Until this issue is addressed, the cycle of violence, isolation, and dehumanization will continue to thrive within these institutions. The most infamous supermax prison in the United States is the ADX Florence, located in Colorado. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it houses some of the most notorious criminals in American history. Inmates here include terrorists, serial killers, and gang leaders, all of whom are deemed too dangerous to be housed in regular prisons. The conditions at ADX Florence have been widely criticized, with reports of extreme isolation, sensory deprivation, and a complete lack of human contact for years at a time. One of the most concerning aspects of life in ADX Florence is the level of control that prison authorities have over every aspect of an inmate's life. From the moment they arrive, prisoners are subjected to a strict regimen that controls everything from what they wear to what they eat. Inmates are often locked in their cells for 23 hours a day, with little or no opportunity to socialize with other prisoners. Even their exercise time is spent in small, enclosed cages, allowing them only minimal exposure to the outside world. The psychological toll of being held in such extreme isolation can be devastating. Studies have shown that prolonged solitary confinement can lead to severe mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and even psychosis. Inmates in supermax prisons often experience a complete breakdown of their mental and emotional well-being, which can last long after their release. One of the most famous cases of solitary confinement at ADX Florence involved the notorious Boston Marathon bomber, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. After being convicted of the 2013 bombing, Tsarnaev was sentenced to death and sent to ADX Florence. He was placed in solitary confinement, where he was kept in a small, windowless cell for 23 hours a day. His isolation was so extreme that he was denied access to even basic human interaction, including visits from family members. The use of solitary confinement in supermax prisons has drawn the attention of human rights organizations around the world. Many experts argue that it is a violation of international human rights law, particularly the prohibition against torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. The United Nations has called for an end to solitary confinement, especially for vulnerable prisoners such as juveniles, the mentally ill, and those serving long sentences. In addition to the psychological harm caused by solitary confinement, there is also the issue of physical abuse. Guards at supermax prisons are often given free rein to use force against inmates who are seen as a threat or who refuse to comply with orders. This has led to numerous reports of excessive force, including beatings, use of pepper spray, and other forms of physical punishment. The culture of brutality within these facilities has been condemned by many, but it continues to persist. Another aspect of life in supermax prisons is the lack of access to education and vocational training. Inmates in these facilities are often denied the opportunity to engage in programs that could help them rebuild their lives and reintegrate into society upon their release. Instead, they are left to languish in their cells, with little hope for their future. This lack of rehabilitation is one of the key criticisms of the supermax prison system. Some advocates for prison reform argue that the supermax system does little to address the underlying causes of criminal behavior. Rather than focusing on rehabilitation or offering inmates a chance at redemption, supermax prisons are designed solely to punish and isolate. This approach, many argue, only perpetuates the cycle of crime and incarceration, making it more likely that inmates will return to prison once released. The issue of prison overcrowding is another factor contributing to the growth of supermax prisons. As the prison population continues to rise, more and more individuals are being sent to high-security facilities like ADX Florence. This has led to an increased reliance on solitary confinement as a means of controlling dangerous or disruptive inmates. However, the long-term effects of this practice are detrimental both to the individuals involved and to society as a whole. The lack of transparency within supermax prisons has been another point of contention. Inmates are often held in these facilities for years without any real oversight, making it difficult to know the true extent of the abuse that occurs behind closed doors. Human rights organizations have called for greater transparency and accountability in the prison system, but so far, progress has been slow. In many ways, the supermax system represents a failure of the justice system to address the needs of both inmates and society. While it may be true that some individuals pose a significant threat to others, the extreme conditions of solitary confinement are not the answer. Instead, the focus should be on rehabilitation, mental health treatment, and providing inmates with the tools they need to successfully reintegrate into society. One of the most chilling aspects of the Supermax system is the complete lack of empathy for the individuals housed within it. Inmates are often viewed as nothing more than animals to be caged and controlled. This mindset is reflected in the conditions they endure, which are designed to strip them of their humanity. By treating prisoners as less than human, the system perpetuates a cycle of violence, isolation, and despair. The psychological effects of being treated like an animal in prison are far-reaching. Many inmates who are subjected to solitary confinement report feeling a sense of dehumanization and worthlessness. This feeling of being invisible and unimportant can have long-lasting effects on their self-esteem and their ability to reintegrate into society upon release. While some may argue that Supermax prisons are necessary for maintaining order and protecting society from dangerous criminals, the reality is that the system often fails to achieve these goals. Inmates who are subjected to extreme isolation and abuse may become even more dangerous over time, as they develop deep-seated anger and resentment toward the system that has treated them so cruelly. The issue of prison reform is more important than ever. As the population of Supermax prisons continues to grow, the need for a more humane and effective system of incarceration becomes increasingly urgent. Until changes are made, however, it seems likely that the cycle of abuse, isolation, and dehumanization will continue, with devastating consequences for both the individuals involved and society at large. The impact of Supermax prisons extends beyond the individuals who are housed within them. The families of inmates also suffer as they watch their loved ones endure unimaginable hardship. In many cases, family members are denied the opportunity to visit their relatives in these facilities, further isolating the inmates and contributing to the breakdown of family relationships. The human cost of the Supermax system is immense. It is estimated that there are currently thousands of individuals incarcerated in solitary confinement in the United States. These individuals are often subjected to conditions that would be considered cruel and unusual in any other context. Yet, despite the growing body of evidence that solitary confinement causes severe psychological harm, the practice remains widespread. The idea that inmates should be punished rather than rehabilitated is a deeply ingrained belief within the criminal justice system. However, this approach has proven to be ineffective, as it fails to address the root causes of criminal behavior. Instead of focusing on punishment, the system should prioritize rehabilitation and mental health treatment, providing inmates with the support they need to break free from the cycle of crime and incarceration. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to reform the prison system in the United States. This movement calls for an end to the use of solitary confinement and a shift toward more humane treatment of inmates. While progress has been slow, there are signs that the public is becoming more aware of the issue and is demanding change. One potential solution to the problem of Supermax prisons is the use of restorative justice programs. These programs focus on healing and rehabilitation rather than punishment. By addressing the underlying causes of criminal behavior and providing inmates with the tools to rebuild their lives, restorative justice programs have the potential to break the cycle of crime and create a more effective and compassionate system of incarceration. The future of the Supermax prison system is uncertain. While some argue that it is necessary to keep dangerous criminals away from the general population, others believe that it is time to move toward a more humane and rehabilitative approach. Until the system is reformed, however, the treatment of inmates in these facilities will continue to be a source of controversy and debate. It is clear that the current system of incarceration is failing many of the individuals it is meant to serve. Instead of providing an opportunity for rehabilitation and reintegration into society, Supermax prisons are designed to punish and isolate. This approach has led to widespread abuse, mental health problems, and a system that is broken beyond repair. The treatment of prisoners in Supermax facilities is a stain on the reputation of the criminal justice system. While it may be true that some individuals have committed heinous crimes, the solution is not to subject them to a life of isolation and torment. The answer lies in reform, rehabilitation, and a more humane approach to incarceration. As the conversation about prison reform continues, It is important to remember that the issue is not just about the treatment of criminals, but about the kind of society we want to live in. A society that dehumanizes its most vulnerable members is one that has lost its moral compass. It is time to demand change and work toward a more just and compassionate system. The history of supermax prisons is a reminder of the dangers of an unchecked and punitive system. While these prisons were originally created to house the most dangerous individuals, they have instead become places of unimaginable cruelty and suffering. Until the system is overhauled, it seems unlikely that the cycle of abuse will come to an end. The global community has called for reform, but change remains slow and elusive. However, each small victory for prison reform brings us one step closer to a system that values human dignity over punishment. In the end, true justice cannot be achieved through cruelty and isolation. It can only be achieved through compassion and rehabilitation. The horror stories coming out of supermax prisons should serve as a wake-up call. We cannot continue to ignore the harm being done to individuals who have been placed in these facilities. The solution is not to abandon them, but to offer a system that prioritizes rehabilitation, education, and mental health treatment. Only then can we hope to break the cycle of abuse. The discussion surrounding supermax prisons is complex, with many factors contributing to the current state of the system. However, one thing is certain: the treatment of prisoners must change. We must begin to view inmates as human beings deserving of dignity and respect, not animals to be caged and forgotten. By taking a more humane approach to incarceration, we can begin to heal the wounds of those who have been subjected to the brutal conditions of supermax prisons. It is time to rethink the way we view punishment and consider what it means to truly achieve justice. The tragedy of supermax prisons is that they have become a system that punishes individuals not just for their crimes, but for their very humanity. The brutality of these institutions serves only to reinforce the cycle of violence and isolation. It is time to move away from this approach and embrace a more compassionate vision of justice. As the demand for prison reform grows louder, it is clear that supermax prisons cannot continue to exist in their current form. The damage they cause to individuals and to society as a whole is too great to ignore. Reform is not just necessary, it is urgent. If we are to create a truly just society, we must address the deep flaws in the criminal justice system, including the use of supermax prisons. These institutions are a relic of a punitive era that has long since passed. The time for change is now. The legacy of supermax prisons is one of pain, suffering, and dehumanization. But it does not have to be this way. By prioritizing rehabilitation and mental health care, we can create a system that promotes healing and restoration, not destruction and despair. The question we must ask ourselves is, what kind of society do we want to build? One that punishes its most vulnerable members, or one that offers a path to redemption? The answer is clear. It is time to move beyond supermax prisons and create a justice system that values compassion and dignity. Supermax prisons stand as a testament to the failures of the criminal justice system. The stories of those who have been subjected to their brutal conditions are a stark reminder of the need for reform. We must not allow this system to continue unchecked. The path to reform is not an easy one, but it is one that we must take. The horrors of supermax prisons cannot be ignored any longer. It is time to demand a system that treats all individuals with respect and compassion. We cannot continue to turn a blind eye to the suffering of those held in supermax prisons. The time for change is long overdue, and it is up to us to demand a justice system that values humanity over punishment. As the world begins to recognize the inhumanity of supermax prisons, the movement for prison reform continues to grow. It is a movement that calls for a future where individuals are given the opportunity to heal and reintegrate into society, not to be subjected to a life of isolation and suffering. The history of supermax prisons is one of failure, but it does not have to define our future. With the right changes, we can create a justice system that offers hope, healing, and redemption to those who have been caught in its web. It is time to take a stand for those who have been silenced by the brutality of supermax prisons. We must work together to create a system that values human dignity and ensures that no one is treated like an animal again. The time for change is now.